Bangladesh, on the other hand, presents a totally what we call it as a different yet equally complex case again. While India shares, strong historical and the cultural ties with that of Bangladesh. So can we go to the next slide, please? The introduction one slide. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I was in that Bangladesh, no doubt, again, it was a complex case. Why I say so? Because a lot of concerns were being there with respect to the Islamic radicalization and cross-border terrorism. They still do persist. And, India has in recent years had praised Dhaka's counter-terrorist measures. They were actively being engaged in intelligence sharing as well as the joint security operations also. But the issues like illegal immigrations, smuggling, and the harboring of insurgents from India's northeastern states, they had occasionally, had strained these bilateral ties and had also compelled India to adopt what we call it as a security-first approach to its diplomatic overtures. Now, on the other hand, when we talk about Nepal, now Nepal open borders with India has traditionally facilitated the cultural as well as the economic exchange, but it has also, exploited by the terrorist networks as well as the insurgents groups. Furthermore, the political instability within Nepal, it has also allowed a space for the external actors to influence its security apparatus, often requiring India to balance its strategic interests with respect to the Nepal's sovereignty. Now, on the other hand, let's take up the case of the Sri Lanka. Now, India's bilateral relations with is heavily being influenced by the legacy of the civil war and the presence of LTTE. Now, while the LTTE has been, militarily defeated, the broader issues of ethnic reconciliations and residual, militancy, it continued to affect the India's foreign policy postures as such. Now, India had remained, it's ensuring the Tamil interests time and again, cooperating with the Colombo on maritime security issues. Various counter-terrorism initiatives has been taken place into it. But still, we see that in the Chinese, we have the influence of the Indian Ocean. So the next slide, please. Yeah, this slide only. Thank you. Okay. Then lastly, we also have the Maldives. Now, Maldives, though it is a very small island nation, but it plays a very crucial role and a very important role of India's maritime security strategy. Now, the rise of Islamic extremism and the return of radical, Maldivian fighters and conflict zones, they have definitely posed a very serious threat on India's security. And India has also responded with a blend of soft diplomacy as well as the hard security interventions, including the military aid as well as the intelligence sharing, to ensure that all these factors, they remain in the strategic sphere of influence as such. So, given that introduction, you see some of the key questions that I'll be discussing about it, as well as the presentation objectives, like examining the role of India's in the foreign policies with respect to Sri Lanka, the Bangladesh, as well as Maldives, and what can be the regional forums as well as the global forums can be there to achieve some sort of a security issues as such. All right, going to the next slide, please. Now, India-Bangladesh, it is a model of counter-terror cooperation as such. So the bilateral relationships between India and Bangladesh, it had evolved over a period of time. They have shared their common history. They have their own cultural ties. The geographic proximity is very close about it. And India, it has been one of the longest neighbor with Bangladesh as such. Their connections include deep economic linkages, historical affinity dating back to 1971, Liberation War, and increasingly they also have a shared commitment towards the regional security as such. So Bangladesh, it has emerged as a model of effective counter-terror cooperation with that of India, setting a precedent for mutual trust, institutional coordination, as well as for the proactive diplomacy as such. Now, looking into these parameters, the first is the historical context and the early security challenges if we look into it. So during in the 1990s and early 2000s, we see that India's security establishment viewed Bangladesh with a growing apprehensions. The rise of Islamic radicalism in Bangladesh, combined with the use of its territory and insurgents group from India's northeast, definitely had raised concerns for India too. So militant outfits such as ULFA, that is United Liberation Front of Assam, then we have NSCN, that is Nationalists Socialist Council of Nagaland, and various other groups, associated with the border insurgency movements in the Northeast, had definitely exploited the very sensitive border areas to seek refugees, to regroup, to launch attacks on the Indian soils as such. And additionally, the growing presence of the jihadist groups. Now, yesterday only I was talking about some of the jihadist groups in Bangladesh. That is the Jamaat ul Mujahideen Bangladesh, that is JMB. Then we have Harkat ul Jihad al Islami Bangladesh, that is HUJIB, and Anusullah Bangla team, that is pose the risk of cross-border spillovers as such. So the discovery that the JMB operatives within the network spanning into the West Bengal as well as Assam highlighted the urgent need for having a coordinated intelligence sharing between these two nations as such. So, the combination of separatist insurgencies and Islamic militancies, both targeting the Indian interest, had definitely made Bangladesh a key node in India's counter-terrorism strategies as such. Now, Sheikh Hasina's proactive counter-terror approach, if we talk about, Sheikh Hasina's government marked a very clear, departure from the early uncertainty of the Bangladeshi's authority towards India's security concerns as such. And recognizing that terrorism poses a threat to that of Bangladesh's own stability and international image, her administration had undertook a very decisive actions and dismantled the insurgent infrastructure and cooperate with India's law enforcement agencies as such. And one of the most significant contribution, that was the crackdown of the Northeast Indian insurgent groups operating in the Bangladesh territory. Now, this is very interesting about over here. So, under Sheikh Hasina's, leadership, Bangladesh or Dhaka people, they have arrested and handed over the several top ULFA as well as NSCN, leaders of the Indian authorities. And because those were the, grounds for the, what you say, as a safe sanctuary for those terrorist people. So the extradition of Alpha leaders like Anup Chetia in 2015 and Arvind Rajkua to India after over 2 decades of shelter in Bangladesh had definitely proved to be a milestone in the trust-building relationship between these two countries as such. And moreover, her government also took steps to neutralize the Islamist, extremist groups. And after the terror attacks of 2013 and 16, including the high-profile, Holy Artisan Bakery attack, Bangladesh had intensified its counter-terror operations across the nation as such. Institutional and strategic instrument for cooperation, if we say, they definitely include the extradition treaties and various legal agreements that India and Bangladesh has been signing from time to time, for that matter, where they have been deported to one another's land if the person had done a serious crime such as that of terrorism. While the treaty, it has been cautiously applied, but it is definitely been mindful of the political sensitivities, and it symbolizes a very mature and a legal partnership to tackle the cross-border threats as such. Then over here, we also have a high level of dialogues and the talks, the joint working groups between the two nations. That is, time and again, they meet about it. They provide the platforms for the real-time intelligence exchanges. Assessment of evolving threats has been taken into considerations and so on. Plus the border management coordination. Now, this is very important because both the countries' border guard of Bangladesh, that is BGP, as well as the India's border security force, that is BSF, And these two are the bodies that, had introduced a very well coordinated and the border management plans as such. And as a result, various joint operations has also been taken place between the two border countries as such. Then, of course, a lot of joint military exercises are there. MOUs have been signed. Then the regional cooperation through BIMSTEC. Now, BIMSTEC is the Bay of Bengal initiative of multi-sectorial technical and economic cooperation. So both the countries have advocated various frameworks to enhance what we call it as a regional intelligence network in order to prevent the financing of terrorism and also to promote the capacity building across the member states as such. Now, when we talk about these two countries, if we look into the foreign, policy outcome, like what is the foreign policy like these two countries have been facing? So we come across that with the domestic and the political, dynamics, as well as the occasional border incidents that is at the surface level, the strategic trust between New Delhi and Dhaka, it had deepened significantly over a past decades as such. So now India now views Bangladesh not merely as a neighbor, but also as a security partner capable of contributing to the regional stability as such. And moreover, if we see over here, India has expanded its own lines of credit to Bangladesh. Somewhere around $8 billion is already being invested cross-border, be it your energy, your transport infrastructure, and other linkages to have a mutual trust, security trust, as well as to have a good bedrock relations between the two as such. And moreover, one more example that I like to emphasize over here is to improve their border security and trade issues also. They have their integrated check post, that is Petropol and Benapol, check post that they have done, where they are looking into it that no terror activities is being done on these particular areas as such. So these are some of the things that India and Bangladesh, they are working upon it. But of course, it's not free of any challenges. Despite various things, various challenges are very much been there. Erratic incidents of border violences happens, issues of illegal immigrations are there. Then we have politicization of identity. It's still very much straining the relations between the two. To sustain such a momentum, India and Bangladesh, they should strengthen what we call it as people-to-people ties as such, expand the academic and policy exchange on counter-terrorism. And of course, regional initiatives like BIMSTEC or its Indian Ocean Rim Association, IRA, they can be harnessed to create a multilateral buffers against the emerging terror threats as such. Moving to the next slide, please. Okay. The next section, basically, it talks about India and Sri Lanka. Now, when we talk about India and Sri Lanka, now over here we had India and Sri Lanka are shaped by what we call it as geographical, historical, and they also have the maritime, boundaries as such to make their security and strategic interests deeply intertwined with one another. So from India's involvement in the Sri Lankan civil war to its current focus on maritime security, there is, over the decades, we see that the whole relationship between India and Sri Lanka had been evolving for quite some time as such. Now, when we, Pradimam sir, can you move to the next slide? Yeah, thank you. Okay. Now, when we look into this, we see that India's historical role in Sri Lanka civil war and LTTE is very much been there. Now, India's engagement in Sri Lanka's internal conflict, particularly during 1980s and 1990s, it had marked a very complex and a very serious, continuous chapters in the bilateral relationship. Now, the ethnic conflicts between the Sinhala's majority government as well as Tamil minority, it had escalated into a full-fledged civil war in the early 1980s as such. And India, which is a home to a large Tamil population in Tamil Nadu, initially supported this Tamil aspirations for equality, for autonomy. They had also extended the moral and material support to them, to the militant groups like LTTE and so on. However, as the LTT tactics, grew increasingly violent and the secessionist agenda, had hardened, so New Delhi definitely shifted its approach. And in 1987, we see that we have India-Sri Lanka Accord was signed, which called for Tamil autonomy within a united Sri Lanka, and it had resulted into the deployment of the Indian peacekeeping forces also. Now, the main mission of this Indian peacekeeping forces was definitely to enforce peace. That is, of course, one of the reasons. But it had turned into a prolonged and bloody confrontation with that of LTTE, where, somewhere around 1,200 Indian soldiers had lost their lives also. So the intervention, it had perceived by many Sri Lankans as a violation of their sovereignty. And this had definitely put a strained relationship. And as a result of this narrative, what we have to see is the assassination of a former Prime Minister, Rajiv Gandhi, in 1991 by an LTTE suicide bomber as such. So following this, India had adopted what we call it as a non-intervention, while consistently supporting the political situation of Sri Lanka's ethnic conflict, but it was quite not intervening in it. Now, post 2009, we see there was reconciliation as well as de-radicalization. Now, very interestingly, when I was going through the material and when I was looking into it, I found that the end of the civil war in 2009, it had created an opportunity for India to re-engage with Sri Lanka on the issues like development, for political reconciliation, as well as for counter-terrorism too. While India had welcomed the defeat of the LTTE, it also, emphasized the need for just and an inclusive political settlement for the Tamil minority. Now, India's diplomatic efforts for the post-war period cantered, around what we call it on three pillars. Now, what are these three pillars are? First is reconstruction in the war-affected northern and eastern province. That is the first. The second is empowerment of the Tamil civilians. And the third is the support for democratic devolution under the Amendment 13 of the Sri Lanka Constitution. So, however, these new security concerns emerge a decade after the LTTE defeat. And in the year 2019, Sri Lanka was rocked by a series of coordinated suicide bombs in the churches, in the luxury hotels that is being carried out by the local Islamist extremists linked to the NTJ, that is National Theawad Jamaat. Now, in 2019, again, we see about the Easter bombing, which had killed somewhere around 250 people. And as a result, this marked the rise of different brands of terrorism that is rooted not in ethno-nationalism, but in radical Islamism, while transitional, linkages they had with that of an ISI. Now, India was among the first country to share their thought about this terrorist attacks, and India had definitely intensified, intelligence sharing mechanisms like de-radicalization, counter-radical propaganda, cyber surveillance of these extremist networks, and so on. Now coming to the maritime counter-terrorism as well as anti-piracy cooperation, if we talk about it, beyond the land-based terrorism, now the new threat that we are having is that of a maritime security also is very much in demand. Now, both the countries, they are the ones who are looking into the maritime terrorism, piracy, smuggling, as well as illegal fishing in the Indian Ocean. Now, the LTTE Sea Tigers had once posed a very formidable maritime threat, demonstrating how non-state actors would weaponize the coastal zones as such. So, post-conflict, both countries, have prioritized securing their coastal lines, and as well as exclusive economic zones was being created, and so on. Now, over here, India has extended its naval and coastal surveillance support to Sri Lanka through its Indian Navy and India Coastal Guard, offering both training as well as that of an equipment. Now, if we talk about this now, what are the key initiatives that this Navy training they have? They basically do the joint naval exercises like SLINEX that we have, that is Sri Lanka and India naval exercises, which basically focuses on the anti-submarine warfare, maritime interdictions, and humanitarian assistance as well as the disaster relief. Beyond this, they also have what we call it as a coastal radar networks, where a lot of rescue coordination centers have been set up. And then, of course, they also have the vessel traffic management system, that is VTMS. Now, they are the ones who, track the vessel movements and definitely prevent any maritime infiltrations also. And of course, we are all familiar with the Narendra Modi's policy, which we call it as SAGA, that is security and growth for all in the region. And this is an approach that even Sri Lanka had also appreciated about it, where the maritime cooperation is must and it is very much there. Why is it so? To promote what we call it as a blue economy as well as for the sustainable development. Now, besides this, very interestingly, we also have what we call it as a Colombo Security Conclave. Now, Colombo Security Conclave was established in the year 2011, and it had revived over a period of time. And under this conclave, it comprises of India, Sri Lanka, Maldives, Mauritius, Bangladesh, as well as Seychelles also. And main initiative is that the regional maritime, has to be secure. So it's more like a regional security umbrella, particularly at a time when the Chinese maritime influence is expanding in the Indian Ocean through the initiatives like Belt and Road, BRI, and strategic port acquisitions. And the foreign policy outcome, when we talk about it, of course, India's post-conflict engagement with Sri Lanka is very strategic in its nature. From a contention past to the present future, they do not, they of course, they share what we call it as maritime responsibilities, central radicalizations imperative, as well as the regional security collaborations also. But at the same time, we see about it that uh, the strategic location of Sri Lanka is very close to the shipping lanes. So making its stability one of the more core concerns for that of the India's naval doctrine on the Indian Ocean strategy as such. So India, Sri Lanka's counter-terrorism and maritime security cooperation illustrates the evolution of a bilateral relationship that has moved from what we call it as a conflict management to that of a strategic participation as such, or partnership. Okay, now moving to the next one, please. Now coming to India and Nepal, they have open borders, and of course we call it as a more of a dual-edged sword. So in the meantime, you'll just come to know why we call it so. The open border system between India and Nepal, it was formalized under 1950, that is Indo-Nepal Treaty of Peace and Friendship, that allow its citizens of both the countries to travel, reside, work inside one another's territory without the need of visas or permits for that matter. While this arrangement has fostered various close people-to-people ties, but of course, often it has also been misused by the criminal syndicates and the insurgent groups. Now, several incidents of smuggling, that is involving narcotics, arms, fake Indian currencies, that is FICN, have been traced, passing through the routes of Nepal. Additionally, the vulnerable borders is often being exploited by the terror operatives also. Now, the lack of biometric surveillance, limited infrastructure for customs as well as the border control, and of course, a high level of informal crossing. All these things definitely complicate India's efforts to regulate the cross-border crime as such. Moreover, India's security agencies have also flagged the growing use of Nepal as a transit corridor by the various extremist elements as such. So there have been multiple arrests of the terror suspects in the Indian cities who had alleged to cross into India from Nepal after receiving the logistic support or the sentry from Nepal country as such. So these developments, had definitely led to the threat to the Indian security. Now, emerging radicalization as well as risk in the Terai region. Now, while Nepal has historically remained outside the radar of the Islamic extremism, security trends often, over the last decades had showed a tremendous shift as such. Indian intelligence agencies have reported a radical, uh, you know, poaching activities, foreign funding from the religious institutions, circulation of the extremist literature in the Terai belt. And these are some of the things where we see that the Terai region is very, very vulnerable in its nature. The reasons are because of the poverty and the marginalization. Many Terai people, communities, they are economically underdeveloped. They are quite vulnerable from the external ideological influences. Then we have what we call it as a cross-border movement. Radical elements often, exploit the fluidity of India and Nepal borders, move unnoticed between the safe zones, and presence of the various external factors also. So Nepal's weak enforcement mechanism and its historical focus on the domestic political instability had also, particularly when there was this transition from monarchy to republic, then there was federal restructuring, then there was periodic, political disturbances. It had definitely made it a very uneven terrain as such. And as a result, India remained concerned about its spillover potentials of radical network using Nepalese territories for recruitment, training, as well as for infiltrations for the Indian states as such. Now, one of the major problems that Nepal, we people face in India also, the problem of the fake Indian currency notes. Now, this has had multiple layers of the security concerns. Now, Nepal has frequently used a very, conduit for the injection of these counterfeit currencies into the Indian economy. Now, this nexus often overlaps with that of narcotics as well as the small arm trafficking as such, with the seizing in the Indian border districts indicating the convergence of the multiple criminal economies as such. So, several reports had indicated that the terror financing network leverage these smuggling channels, and as a result, there is a various, fund low intensity operations that has been operating within this particular region as such. Now, when we look into their policy responses or strengthening, how to strengthen about the cross-border coordination, we see about it that both India and Nepal had initiated multiple mechanisms. No doubt about it. There were a lot of bilateral talks, joint work groups, the similar with that of Bangladesh also. Regularly, they hold the Home Secretary level meetings also. DG level dialogues are very much there. Then SSB, that is your Rashtriya Seema Bal as such, as well as Nepal armed political forces, police forces are there. But still, besides this, nothing concrete has come up to us as such. Then border outposts as well as surveillance infrastructure, CCTV networks, drones, ground sensors are being there in the border areas. But while the borders cannot be fenced in the traditional sense due to the open border policies, there has been growing emphasis of non-intrusive surveillance and intelligence-led policing as such. Moreover, Shastra Seema Bal that I talked about, SSB, as well as ARPF, they do have the joint patrolling as such, but various informal arrangements also allow for coordinated apprehensions for the suspects. So, all these things we see about it, intelligence sharing is yet another important thing that both the countries are looking forward to it, be it RAW and IB. They maintain very close contacts with their counterparts in the Kathmandu as such. And of course, deportation and the surveillance of suspects are very much been there. Um, there were various linkages, that is, Indian Mujahideens or Lashkar-e-Taiba or Jaish-e-Mohammed, who had entered in Nepal seeking their refuge and using that as a transit point as such. While Nepal does not have a formal de-radicalized policy, India definitely offers what they say as developing their counter narratives as such, concluding their community outreach, as well as provide the training for the Nepal police also. And moreover, we see that a lot of capacity building and technical assistance are also being given to that of Nepal as such, so that the bilateral sensitivities can be taken into the consideration as such. Now, moving to the next, please. Um, India, Maldives, when we talk about it, countering radicalization as well as the maritime terrorism as such. Now, Maldives is a chain of somewhere around 1,000 islands in the Indian Ocean. And it may appear very idyllic and very geopolitically peripheral in its nature. But in recent years, we see that this had been a major focal point for the India's security concerns also. Um, Now, despite being small in size as well as population, Maldives occupy a very vital strategic position along with the major international shipping routes. So, its proximity to the Indian Lakshadweep Islands as well as to the southern coast of India's place, heart of India's maritime interest, that is Indian Ocean region. Against this backdrop, we see that there is a lot of rise of Islamic radicalization that has been happening in this particular region as such. So the Maldivian freedom fighters phenomena that we talk about, one of the most alarming security concern of the Maldives is the foreign terrorist organizations that has been seen over a decade or so. So the Maldives, they has what we call it per capita, one of the highest rate of foreign fighters recruitment to ISIS, with an estimated somewhere around 200 plus Maldivians. They have been traveling to that of Syria and Iraq during the peak of ISIS's territorial control, that is from the year 2014 to 2017. So this figure is quite striking, given that the Maldives is very, the total population of around 500,000 of the people. And radicalization in Maldives had taken its root due to its various factors. Maybe the reasons are many, but for this particular lecture, I'll just concentrate to the socioeconomic disparities, high youth unemployment, returning the fighters with the compact experiences, and so on. And the traditionally moderate Islamic society has in recent decades also seen the rise of Wahhabi inspired ideologies as such. So this radicalized elements in the Maldives not only threatens the country's own internal stability, but it also poses the risk of India's coastal assets, strategic shipping lanes, as well as the naval operations also. Now, when we talk about their bilateral engagement or the defense engagement as such, so over here, India has responded to these concerns by pursuing its comprehensive security partnership with that of Maldives, focusing of maritime surveillance, counter-terror training, and institutional strengthening again. And it is basically grounded on the net security provider to that of the Indian Ocean. Now, coastal surveillance and technology support is one of the major forte of that of India. And India had no doubt installed what we call it as a coastal radar system across multiple, atolls in the Maldives as a part of their regional initiatives to integrate it to the Indian Ocean states as such. So this system is definitely linked with the Maldives Moldavian stations, with that of the India's Navy Information Fusion Center, as well as India's Ocean Region, that is IFC and IOR, which is based in Gurugram, Gurgaon, enabling a real-time, situational awareness, like what exactly is being going on in that Indian Ocean region as such. Then, of course, training and exercise and logistics is very much there. They are the ones who are also training Maldivian security forces, that is including Maldives National Defense Forces, that is MNDF, especially counter-terrorism, anti-terror operations, as well as the maritime interdictions as such. Now, then we have the Indian Navy and the Coastal Guard also. That also requires a lot of joint training modules. Then we have simulation drills. Then we have capacity building exercises, and so on. And one more important exercise that I can think about over here is exercise Ekta, right? EAKTHA, Ekta. That is a bilateral joint training initiative that also improves the tactical coordinations and promote the coordination between India and the Maldives security forces as such. Moreover, the Operation Cactus is also being very much over here. That is trust building through the crisis response. Now, quickly, I'll just tell you what exactly this Cactus was, Operation Cactus was. So India's credibility in the Maldives has deep roots in this Operation Cactus that was taking place in the year 1988. It was a swift and a very successful military operation that was carried out by the Indians to foil a coup attempts done by the Maldivian president, that is Mamun Abdul Gayoom, Gayoom. Now, when the missionaries from the, plot, that is your People's Liberation Organization of Tamil Ilam, launched an armed insertions in Malay, India responded within hours by airlifting the paratroopers to secure the government buildings and restore the order. So Operation Cactus not only cemented the India's image as a reliable regional power, but it has also laid a ground foundation for a long-term defense cooperation as such between the two countries as such. Now, no doubt, India and Maldives had various joint naval patrols, plus we have the humanitarian assistance missions also. We also have the Coastal Guard patrol vessels, and as a result, Maldivian, Coast Guard harbors are also being established as such. Then, if we talk about the strategic forum, a little while only I have talked about the Colombo Security Conclave. So that is one mission where we can think about that we are in, with the Maldives as such, which shows interest in aligning with its national counter-terrorism centers also. So technical assistance definitely is being provided. When we talk about the foreign policy, so Maldives definitely offers a very microscopic, test case for India's evolving regional security and foreign policy strategy. It illustrates how India's hard security measures, be it radar, naval deployment, or defense assistance, with its soft power tools like healthcare, education, climate, cultural diplomacy, all this definitely created the sustainable as well as trust-based security partnerships as such. And moreover, India also had provided a lot of scholarships, yoga, wellness initiative, renewable energy collaborations with the Maldivian societies as such. So maintaining this continuity of defense and counter-terror cooperation, irrespective of any of the domestic politics, it is essential we see like what is the long-term interest that we have with that of the Maldives as such. And this is, so as the geopolitical competition intensifies in the Indian Ocean, maintaining such a momentum, it's one of the things which is quite sensitive in its nature, but at the same time, it is also key securing for both India as well as for its regional interest. Moving to our last slide, please. Okay. Can we go to the next slide? Okay. Now, coming over here, India's regional and global counter-terror strategy. So terrorism, of course, now this is the fourth day that I've been talking about it, and it continues to be one of the most persistent threats of India's internal stability as well as regional security. So these are certain things that we definitely look into it. That is limitation of SARC. That is a dysfunctional security mechanism. Despite, being the foremost regional organization, SARC has largely failed to develop a coordinated counterterrorism framework. No doubt, established in 1985, SARC was envisioned as a platform for its economic and regional cooperation. However, persistent India and Pakistan tensions have rendered it largely ineffective in addressing the core security concerns, including that of terrorism. While SARC no doubt had adopted various declarations, conventions, but still the fact remains that it is an toothless and under implemented as such. The absence of trust, the lack of political will, especially from that of Pakistan, had led to not very concrete progressive counter-terror policies as such. Now, when we talk about the alternative regional frameworks, now some of them are BIMSTEC and Colombo Security Conclave. BIMSTEC, why I say so? Because it brings about 7 countries together, like India, Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, then we have Myanmar, and Thailand, of course, connecting to South and South Asia. So Southeast Asia, sorry. So BIMTEC has emerged as a strategic alternative to that of SARC, especially in the domain of security cooperation. But again, India has actively pushed into institutionalization, but BIMSTEC national security chief meetings and security connected to that of the Bay of Bengal, it's still a large dream as such. And Colombo Security Conclave, I have already discussed this. So moving to the next, that is India's global engagement, that is United Nations. Of course, India has consistently been pushed for stronger global norms in the United Nations. It has repeatedly, called for the comprehensive conventions on international terrorism, plus proactive role of the UN Security Council is very much being needed. And under 1267 Sanction Committee also, we oversee that a lot of entities like Al-Qaeda and ISI is being listed, but still nothing concrete has been happening about it. And as far as Financial Action Task Force is concerned, making Pakistan grey listed is one of the things. But again, we see about over here that this state-sponsored terrorism is still one of the most dominant role that most of the states have been playing in that of South Asia. So India's regional and global counter, terror security reflects a very pragmatic shift away from the non-functional groupings like that of SARC towards a more responsive, aligned platforms. Now, we have yet to see about it, like how India is adopting a multi-layered strategies, strengthening its domestic reliance, as well as building the regional coalitions and shaping its global norms as such. So in this era where we have the hybrid threats and international and transnational terror as such, a very comprehensive approach enables the India to better, safeguard its interest while contribute constructively to international peace as well as to that of security. So with this, I'll wind up my lecture. Thank you so much again for listening so patiently. But any doubts or any queries or anyone would like to speak anything, please, you are free to do so. Any questions or anything that you'd like to ask? None, I guess. If it's not, then Pradyum sir, can we wind up the session then?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, Anshu, you're there. Okay, I couldn't see you. All right. Thank you so much. Nice talking to you, but I was the one who was doing the major talking. But I think if no queries, so I'll wind up it. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you, ma'am, for the session. Have a great day, you too. Thank you, all the participants.